father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelt funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There was always a freaky homeless guy that thought he was a vampire hanging out by the shelves. I always hated the library. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city where I saw a lot of my kids didn't have a lot of the advantages I had growing up. And I basically said, shame on me. I mean, I was
Mm.
blessed. Both of my parents were in the home. We were poor, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us kids, to us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And so it really became a passion of mine, especially a lot of my kids never went anywhere. And I said, you don't need to go anywhere to have a passport. Your library card can show you the entire world. I've always thought it's funny that Jules Verne wrote Around the World in 80 Days and he never once left France his entire life. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty cool story. And now I'm passionate and I've got one of the top reading clubs online and I just like to work with people that say, oh, people say I have no time to read. I'm like, who has time to read when you watch the game on TV, have a couple of beers, go out shopping? I mean, life is all about priorities. And so I find when schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read, but the question I always ask people is what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go turn on the TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it. And there's simple strategies I share with parents on how to get their kids to love reading.
Hello, team. I know many of you are entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, or of that general, let's say. And I also know that many of you struggle to stand out without sounding too salesy. You're probably extremely good at your stuff, whatever that might be, but you just don't know how to tell your story and tell it in a way that really connects. Now, that's one thing we're going to be looking at today, but another thing is parents and educators. They face a different challenge, not about telling their story, but about helping kids fall in love with reading, especially in the traditional methods. So we're blessed today to have a guest with us who's cracked both of these codes. Dr. Danny Brassell, affectionately known, Danny, I want to say, as the Jim Carrey with a PhD. I'm sure you've heard that many times. Danny's a storytelling expert, a TEDx speaker, as well as a literacy advocate, and works with entrepreneurs to help them attract their clients through authentic stories, but also to help kids discover the joy of reading. And two topics I'm very passionate about, so I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Welcome to the ET Project, Danny.
Thanks so much for having me, Wayne. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you. I appreciate you.
Looking forward to this conversation. Um, highly high energy, humorous, and deeply insightful was one of the quotes I read about you. So feel free to make a
You're
slight.
giving me a big head, Wayne.
Why don't we start and go back a little ways, look at a bit of your backstory without too much detail, but what led you to start this journey?
Oh, goodness. If I was going to write an autobiography, Wayne, it would probably be called Pivots because I feel like I've already lived 9 lives. 30 years ago, I was a journalist, got to cover President Bush Sr. for the 1992 presidential election here in America. I loved my job. I got to meet every major editor of every major daily, and one offered me the job as a city beat reporter for $16,500 a year. Meanwhile, a friend told me that they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles in the inner city for $25,000 a year. So I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, Wayne, for the high pay. And I actually fell in love with teaching, and I've taught all age levels from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. And in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could give you the woe is me story, but I'm a positive person. I learned a lot from that experience. First of all, I learned that my wife is my soulmate. She stuck with me and is just an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned money's not everything because you can lose money just like that.
Yeah.
Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I did, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to confess, but the more I read the Bible, I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And then fifth, I didn't want to file for bankruptcy, and my accountant said, well, you have to earn this much more money this year. So I started speaking on the side, and I hit his number right on the number. Well, the next year, Wayne, he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. So in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downfalls of society, I was able to build a highly lucrative speaking business, which attracted the attention of some pretty famous people and companies who started asking me to coach them. And I resisted. You need to know this about me, Wayne. One of the reasons I left teaching is I have a very high standard for my students. I will not let you fail. I will hold you accountable and be on your back until you succeed. Well, now that I work with entrepreneurs and executives and business owners, I find that they're highly motivated. They do the work. It's probably the most gratifying thing I've ever done. So I absolutely love it. So that's a very long answer to your short question, but I've been all over the place.
I like the answer because it opens so many corridors for us to continue the discussion. But before we go too much deeper into that, I know you travel a lot, and we were just talking before we hit record about you just come back from Northern Ireland playing golf. Now there's going to be a lot of envious people out there, but what's your handicap?
Oh gosh, my handicap's probably 28. I'm not good. I'm not a good golfer. I am a golfer. I'm not a good golfer. And I really I love watching people that are great at golf. I mean, you Aussies are great. I mean, Adam Scott. I remember watching Adam Scott. The only tournament I've ever been to in person was in 2008, the US Open that Tiger Woods won on a bad leg. But I'll never forget I was there on Friday and I watched the threesome and it was Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, and Adam Scott. This is before Adam Scott had won the Masters. He was the
Right.
fourth ranked player on the planet, Wayne, and not a single person was paying attention to him because Phil and Tiger were in that group. I was amazed by that, and I was disappointed that Adam Scott couldn't pull it out at the U.S. Open because I always root for him. But yeah, I love watching golf. I don't think people love watching me play golf.
You mentioned Adam Scott. Greg Norman comes to mind as another famous Australian, but not always famous under pressure, or maybe famous under pressure for the wrong reason. So
Yeah, well, David, you
yeah,
had David Thompson back in the 50s. Yeah, I mean, Aussies have, Steve Elkington won the PG. I mean, there's a lot of great,
sure.
Aaron Badley, I remember was good for a long time. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a great. I had a friend that played on the Australasian tour, and they just always produce great champions.
We do love our sport. I have to
Yeah.
concur. We like it enough. Let's talk a little bit more about. I'd like to jump into the reading first up, if you don't mind, before we get into
Okay.
the business side. But um, you have so many great sites that I've been to in preparation for our conversation. The reading revolution. Um, you started as a reluctant reader, from what I read. Can you share a little bit about that and how that transitioned for you?
Yeah, I mean it's ironic. I'm considered America's leading reading ambassador because I grew up hating reading. My father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelt funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There was always a freaky homeless guy that thought he was a vampire hanging out by the shelves. I always hated the library. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city where I saw a lot of my kids didn't have a lot of the advantages I had growing up. And I basically said, shame on me. I mean, I was
Mm.
blessed, Wayne. Both of my parents were in the home. We were poor, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us kids, to us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And so it really became a passion of mine, especially a lot of my kids never went anywhere. And I said, you don't need to go anywhere to have a passport. Your library card can show you the entire world. I've always thought it's funny that Jules Verne wrote Around the World in 80 days and he never once left France his entire life. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty cool story. And now I'm passionate, and I've got one of the top reading clubs online, and I just like to work with people that say, oh, people say I have no time to read. I'm like, who has time to read when you watch the game on TV, have a couple of beers, go out shopping? I mean, life is all about priorities. And so I find when schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read, but the question I always ask people is what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go turn on the TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it. And there's simple strategies I share with parents on how to get their kids to love reading.
I heard you talking, it may even been the TED talk, you were talking about illiterate versus illiterate. And I guess the not wanting to read is the illiterate side of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot more illiteracy than I mean, and even the illiteracy thing I think is overblown, Wayne. I mean,
Yeah.
I was working with a kid and he was a fourth grader and his teacher's like, he won't read. I was with him for an hour. He must have sent 20 text messages. He emailed some friends. He was surfing the internet. He's highly literate. He's not reading Jane Austen, but he is reading, and that's the big thing. It's not rocket science. Find out what the kid's into. I mean, you were talking about your passion for rugby earlier. If you were one of my students, I'd say, hey, well, here's a book on rugby. Check it out. I mean, the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People
Mm.
who read more read better. I mean, when I was in high school, I had a teacher who made us read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And no offense to people that love The Scarlet Letter, the book is basically about Hester Prynne commits adultery, and so she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand in class and I asked my teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. And I just think back to that time. I'm like, if she was a better teacher, she would have said, well, what do you want to read, Danny? And I would have said, a football book or some kind of sports book. That's what I like to read usually. Now I read all kinds of biographies. But this is why you got to expose kids to this type. I mean, the way I got most of my kids excited about reading is I introduce them to poetry because poems aren't very intimidating. They can be
Right.
short. I mean, even when I was a kindergarten teacher, on Thursdays, no matter what grade I've ever taught, I mandate my kids have to memorize at least 20 poems, and it's a great way to differentiate instruction. So on Thursdays, my kindergartners would become poems. So I got Jose, one of my non-readers, he'd say, "Hi, I'm the sitter by Shel Silverstein. Mrs. McTwitter, the babysitter, I think she's a little bit crazy. She thinks a babysitter's supposed to sit upon the baby." And then I got Laura, one of my top students, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Mark Antony from Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them, the good is often interred with their bones. So let be with Caesar. He was my friend, loyal and just to me. But Brutus is an honorable man." 6-year-old girl memorized 50 lines from Julius Caesar. I got that idea from watching the movie Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger. In that
Right.
movie, he got the kids to memorize the Gettysburg Address. I'm like, huh, I wonder if that's possible. I think we underestimate kids all the time. If you get them interested in something, this is why I love. Everybody else is fearing AI right now. I'm like, oh, AI is just a game changer for kids. I see kids that you would never see wanting to do work, and now they're just sitting there playing around with AI, seeing what they can get away with, which I think is clever. I think I mean, adults were like, oh, they can't get away with that. I'm like, well, we get away with it. The kids are figuring out their little shortcuts, and I love AI because answers are no longer as important as questions. And I've always taught this to kids. I'm like, life is all about asking the right questions. Never give up. It's figuring out what's the best question. That's what AI is. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a rampage, but I get excited because I love figuring out what's the right book for the right. And sometimes it's not a book. Sometimes it's a magazine or a newspaper or whatever. What's the right thing for each person to read?
I can, I'm sure everyone can hear the passion that you have for the topic, and kudos to you. But one question came to mind as I was doing a little bit of preparation. Your approach, I'm going to imagine, works as well with neurodivergent students, learners, as
Mhm.
well as more traditional, more normal learning styles. Would that be the
Yeah,
case?
absolutely. I mean, we just have to expand the definition of reading.
Yes.
I've worked with kids on the spectrum that there's no way you're going to get them to read a novel, but if you give them a
Mm,
technical journal on how to put together a computer, they'll sit there and analyze it for 100 hours. I used to work with autistic kids. One of them was nonverbal, and
right.
his parents were in tears one day because I didn't show up to class, and for the first time in his life, he said a word. He said book. I mean, I guess we were getting through, and it's kind of like reading. Everybody has to also understand reading disabilities. Every reading disability is curable, and by far and away, the most undiagnosed reading disability out there is dyslexia. Uh, I mean, I've seen statistics that can show up to 60% can be dyslexia. I mean, there's a lot of people with dyslexia. And one of the strategies I share with parents is just, and I mean, you're in good company. George Washington was dyslexic. Tom Cruise is dyslexic. Sir Richard Branson's dyslexic. There's a lot of people that are dyslexic, and dyslexics tend to process information better with their ears. And the research shows us it's just as powerful to be read aloud to as it is to read on your own. So I always tell people that are dyslexic, I'm like, well, start listening to audiobooks. That's a good, I, I love listening to audiobooks. It's a
Mm,
great way to spend time in the car. I had read the book Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, but then I
yeah.
listened to him narrate it, and it's so much better when he narrates it. He's just, I mean, actually, you'd like it because he talks about when he was an exchange student in Australia. It's pretty
I've
funny.
got it.
But yeah, it's great stuff. I listen to audiobooks all the time, so that's an easy strategy there to help.
I was going to ask that question. Do you have a preference? Like you, I know you talk a lot about curling up with a good book, and um, probably the older people amongst the listeners feel that way. I'm wondering about is there any loss in the audio approach?
Actually, one of my mentors, unfortunately, he's passed away. His name was Jim Trelease. He wrote probably one of the most important books anybody can read called the Read-Aloud Handbook, where the first half of the book gives you all the research on why reading aloud is the single best way to improve a kid's reading skills. And then the
Right.
second half of the book goes grade level by grade level recommendations of some of the best books to read aloud to kids. Here in America, I'm one of these nerds. I actually read government reports on reading. So I've read the reports from the last 100 years, a nation at risk, why Johnny can't read, becoming a nation of readers, the National Reading Panel. And it's interesting because these reports are always 2,000 pages long, Wayne, and it's usually on page 100 where there's a paragraph that says, the research seems to suggest the single best way to improve reading is to be read aloud to. And then it never mentions it again because that sounds way too easy. Jim used to say if reading aloud costs $129, every parent in America would rush out and buy it. And if we found out kids didn't like it, they would mandate it in the school system tomorrow. It's so simple, and yet it's so powerful. I mean, when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher in the school that none of my students were ever tardy to class. And the reason is because I always read aloud to them. I'd read aloud a Paul
Right.
Harvey story. Paul Harvey, when I was a kid growing up, he'd be on the radio every day at 12:15 and he'd say, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And for 5 minutes, he'd tell you a story about a person or a company you're trying to guess the whole time. But the
Mm,
problem with Paul Harvey is a lot of his stories are about like Fred Astaire and Sears Roebuck. Well, kids
mm,
today don't know anything about that. And so I wrote a book called Leadership Begins with Motivation, which was basically my homage to Paul Harvey, and it has
Right.
more contemporary stories of people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, people like that. But after I wrote the book, Wayne, I read it and I'm like, huh, completely unintentionally, so many of my stories were of white male Americans. And so the last book I wrote is called Misfits and Crackpots, and most of these stories are of women, minorities, and international people. And that's how you get kids excited about reading, is getting them, again, I always find out what they're passionate about. Really, it was always been easy for me to write books because I try and figure out what the kids are interested in. And I'm like, oh, if there's nothing for you to read, I better write that so you have something to read. And that's what I like doing, is writing stories that inspire them.
Couple of questions on that note, but just to clarify before we do that, you mentioned reading out loud. Now, you talk about you reading to somebody as reading out loud, and or the individual reading out loud. Which is the difference, or is there a difference, or a
Yeah,
better
so
way?
the research shows that kids that are read aloud too. You don't have to, because I mean, I stuttered as a child. I hated popcorn reading. There was nothing that made me angrier and more scared in class than the teacher calling on me to read aloud in front of my classmates. It was very
Right, right,
embarrassing. And I honestly think it probably stinted my reading for years. Uh, so no, just the teacher can read to the kids. The kids will sit there and
mhm,
I mean, when I was a teacher, we called it Fluffy Fridays. I'd have the kids, they'd bring pillows from their house and I'd just let them lay down. And that was the reward for fulfilling all of our goals for the week, is they'd lie down and I would read to them. And that's another little simple little strategy I'm using there, is you
yeah,
got to make reading the reward. I mean, Pizza Hut has the Book It program, which is wonderful. But if I ever meet the CEO of Pizza Hut, I'm going to make a suggestion. The way that program works right now is kids read books and they get rewarded with pizza. If I ran the program, it would be exactly the opposite. Every time a kid came into my Pizza Hut and got some pizza, I'd reward them with a book. You're sending a very different message to the kid that reading is the
yeah,
reward. I mean, my kids, when they get good grades, the reward is we go to the bookstore and they get to buy a book. You're sending a totally different message. Oh, reading is fun. I'm not one of these people that, you know, gives the kids prizes for reading. I give them books. I mean, if I'm going to give them prizes, it's going to be books or bookmarks or,
yeah.
things like that.
I was visualizing a stack of kids around the car. Oh no, don't go there for a present. He'll give you a book. No.
That's right.
On the subject, you showed us a couple of books there. What's the count now? How many books have you released?
I've published 19 so far, but I'm in the process of finishing three because I think you and your listeners can tell I call it ADWT. I have attention deficit. What's that? I have lots of different interests. So yeah, right now I have three completely different books I'm writing that'll be published here hopefully pretty soon. I've been delayed a little bit on that.
And all about learning how to read, or different topics?
Not at all. I have one about one is coming out, is going to be about the process I take entrepreneurs through on how to create a well-crafted speech.
Mhm.
One of them, you and I were talking off air. I wrote a book for my wife about our trip around the world, and she was not thrilled that I had made her a character in one of my books, and so I have to rewrite the book under a pen name and change her name in it. And then the other one is a book. It's for prisoners, to show them hope in prison, because I get a lot of letters from prisoners asking me for books, and so it's actually one of the coolest things. It's kind of funny that it takes incarceration to get a lot of people interested in their education, but I'm like, wow, this is, I mean. I guess the funny line is, well, they're a captive audience, obviously. But, yeah, it's a book of hope for prisoners, to show them that, don't let the worst moment of your life define you. Your story is still being written.
I like. There's so many things we can talk about. That you're also an avid reader, or maybe listener. Um, I read some crazy number. Was it 10 books a week? 10 books a day? Like what was it? How
Oh
many
yeah,
books
I mean,
each day?
well, I used to always tell this to my little ones. I'm like, because one of my favorite historical figures is Teddy Roosevelt. Actually, I got the book right here. There's a great book by Edmund Morris. It's part of a trilogy called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. It
Hmm.
takes you to the moment he became president. The second book in the trilogy is called Theodore Rex, which takes you through his presidency. And then the last book is called Colonel Roosevelt, which shows you what he did after he was president. But by the time he was 30 years old, Teddy Roosevelt had read over 20,000 books. And so my little ones will be like, wow. I'm like, so I tell the kids, we got to read, we got to read a lot of books. And so I'm like, I read 10 books a day, you know. A lot of them are scratch and sniff and pop up, but I do read 10 books a day. Because of I have a book club called the Lazy Readers Book Club at
Yes.
lazyreaders.com. And so those are all book recommendations of books under 250 pages. And so I have probably about 5,000 books sent a year to me from authors all over the place. And I like to profile first-time authors and people that write positive things, especially for young adults. It's horrible when I walk through the bookstore and I go to the young adult teen section, and the books are all about date rape, suicide, dystopian society. I'm like, no wonder teenagers are screwed up. They got nothing but negative stuff to read. I think they need more uplifting things. Show them some
Yeah.
positive examples.
So you have lazy readers. I saw a number of programs that you offer as well to help, well, all ages, I guess, right? From very young through to adult readers.
Yeah.
What are the best sites that we can sort of publicize here that people can go to?
Oh, you're having me break my rule because I always say you should only have one clear call to action. But lazyreaders.com, that's where if you subscribe, it's a free subscription once a month for the rest of your life. I'll give you 10 book recommendations, three or four adult level, three or four young adult level, and three or four children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you have something you can read when you're stuck in the doctor's office or at a boring meeting. Again, I'm just trying to encourage people to read based on their interest. Yeah, I point this out to parents. The little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who refuses to read anything. Captain
Yeah,
Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but you got to get the kid hooked first. And so
yeah,
once human beings, uh, we only do things we're comfortable at.
yeah,
And the psychology is fairly interesting on that. If you don't trust me, drive a different way home tonight. It'll drive you crazy. We're creatures of habit and routine.
yes,
And so it's really important to establish those basic routine. I mean, one of the first strategies I share with parents is turn on the closed captioning on the television set. And people say, well, what if the show's in English and the subtitles are in English? What good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with captioning and not looked at the subtitles? It's actually very difficult to do. Your brain is drawn towards the text, and there's actual research that supports what I'm saying. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country on the planet except for one. The country where kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And people
Finland.
always ask, how can that be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they have to do is they have to import all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Welcome Back, Kotter, and they translate them into Finnish, and the kids are reading all the time. It's an easy strategy. I mean, for me, I have three kids. They're older now, but ever since they were little, I established the habit because I think television's here to stay. And so I always let the kids watch TV, but the price of admission was before they could turn on the TV, they had to bring me something to read. So when they were little, they'd bring me picture books. We'd read the picture book together. Then they could go watch TV. Now they're older, so they usually bring me their iPads and we'll read some news article or something that they find interesting. But I mean, this is 20 years. I mean, my oldest is 21 and she still just has the habit of she knows that before she can turn on the TV, she has to bring me something to read. So we do that. And then just another one, easy strategy for parents is I have book dates with my kids and my wife. So my oldest daughter, she's into Game of Thrones, and so we're reading the George R. R. Martin Fire and Ice book, and there's language and situations I'm not thrilled about, but she's into it, so I can't break my rule. I got to do that. My son, for for some reason, he loves war books and things like that. So we had seen the movie Master and Commander, which is an awesome movie, and so we're reading the book version. And I never knew how stupid I was, Wayne, until I started reading that book because I have to get out a dictionary about 4 times a page. It's written in like Middle English. And then for some reason, my youngest daughter likes literature, and we're reading The Great Gatsby, which I hate that
Oh,
book. I
oh,
hate it. I absolutely, and it's, I guess reading it aloud to her, I guess the good thing is I now understand, oh, F. Scott Fitzgerald, he's a really good writer. I just hate the story. I hate the story. I hate the characters. But I can't show that to her because she likes it. And then my wife, we're reading this really neat little series of books called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. And I can't believe that Reese Witherspoon hasn't bought the movie rights. Such a nice series. It's about this young woman in Elizabethan England, and her three best friends are like an American photographer, a British duke, and a minister. And it's funny and it's nice, and there's no F-bombs and nobody's getting raped. I'm like, wow, I haven't read a book like this in a long time. It's nice. So those are just three real quick strategies that any parent can use to really encourage their kids to read at home.
lazyreaders.com. I subscribed 2 days ago, I think it was.
Great.
My daughter and I had a look through your July list, and we've already picked one of the books. I'm trying to remember what it was about, but there's a children's book on there, so we've already got that one earmarked from Amazon, and we'll
Awesome.
read it. Yeah, so
Adults
recommend.
should know this. Adults should know that the best books are usually the kid. I mean, I wrote a book called, well, here, I'll give you one more website for your, I'm already breaking the rule. I'm supposed to only give one clear call to action, but a free website everybody can go to is freegiftfromdanny.com. So when you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to send you a free copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed, which is a book I wrote for an elementary school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept. Nothing pleases me more than watching CEOs start meetings with Dr. Seuss books. That's because some of the best lessons are in the kids' books. And then I also give you a free 5-day training on how to get your kids pumped up about reading. I'm totally breaking my rule on one clear call to action, but that's a free gift from Danny.com. I guess the teaching point for your audience, Wayne, is you have entrepreneurs listening in, and I think you've seen in my background, I've got lots of different pots on the stove. I mean, so I have my reading businesses there. I have my speaking businesses. I mean, basically on the four aspects of communication: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. I have different arms of my companies working for those different things.
For sure. We'll make a list of all of those in the notes
That's a
below.
long list.
So it's a nice segue though. So let's now transition a little bit into business and communication through the storyline. And I know you talk a lot about storytelling. Um,
Yeah.
why is it that storytelling is such a critical element for anyone that's in a leadership role, but throughout our life? Why do we need to learn to storytell?
Yeah, so of all people, it was Joseph Stalin who said 1 million people dead is a statistic, one person dead is a tragedy. Translation: facts tell, but stories sell. Facts inform, stories can transform. I was sharing with you earlier, one of my clients just did a TEDx talk and she wanted me to analyze it. So I analyzed it right before I came on your podcast. And I mean, I'm like, can you go 10 seconds without giving me a number? I mean, I was doing more math than I've ever had to. It was crazy. Like, give me stories. I was on a Christian podcast the other day, and I pointed this out is um, when I read the Bible, I always laugh because Jesus is just frustrated all the time with his disciples. He's like, all right, dense people, let me tell you a story. Okay, so there's this prodigal son, oh, you still don't get, okay, let me tell you a story about the Good Samaritan. And I don't think you have to be Christian. I bet you most people on the planet are familiar with the prodigal son story or the Good Samaritan, any of these Bible stories. But I'll also make this claim. I bet you 9 out of 10 Christians cannot tell you the Ten Commandments. And the
Mm,
reason is because it's presented as a list. It's not
it's
presented as a story. I mean, I've
exactly.
never had a person tell me, Wayne, 6 months after a presentation, oh, Danny, you know what I loved the most about your talk was that one PowerPoint slide with the 18 bullet points that I couldn't read because the font was so small. I've never had anybody say that, but people remember stories. And
Absolutely.
that's why you use stories is and you look at the most powerful Steve Jobs used to say that. He said the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. I
Mm,
mean, you look at politicians, it's always the person that has a better story wins what's the story that they're gonna tell. You watch the best comedians are great storytellers, but really especially with entrepreneurs, it's your business. I think speaking is the fastest way to grow your business, and it's all about the story that you choose to tell.
yeah. What always amuses me is I've never met anyone who would challenge what you just said. I think we all understand that. What
Um,
what I struggle with is why, therefore, are we so bad in many cases at telling stories? Why
Yeah.
can't we grasp this concept?
I don't know if everybody's bad at it, Wayne. I was just in Ireland and I'm like, oh, these are my people, man. I had to add an extra half hour to every interaction because I knew they were going to talk to me. And I was like, wow, this is the kind of when I was growing up, this was my dinner table, was everybody swapping their different stories. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting point because there's actually research that shows that the more talking taking place in homes, the better you are in school usually, and it doesn't actually matter what language. It's just that the kids are hearing lots of it, and
Mm,
so there's a lot of practice involved, and that's what I tell my clients. I'm like, most of my clients, yeah, I've worked with. So, so I have a company called the Well Crafted Story Workshop with my partners, Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because my background's academia. Coach Jimmy was an actor on Broadway, and Dave was a lawyer and an AI expert from Silicon Valley. And I just always love the way we're analyzing people's stories and listening to, well, what can we do better for people? We work with so many technical people that Jimmy loves to name drop all the famous people we've talked, and I believe in discretion. I don't talk about any of the companies I work with by their real names or the people. But
mm,
most of the people we work with are absolutely terrified of speaking, where they have no interest in speaking, and that's why they don't know how to tell stories. But this is a skill, Wayne. It can be
yeah.
taught. I guarantee you, the first time you did your podcast, you sucked. And the
Right.
second time, you sucked, but you didn't suck as bad as the first time. And now it's a fine oiled machine. You got your process, no problem, because you got it in the reps. My youngest daughter right now is learning how to drive. And I just love watching her because when she gets in the car, she's adjusting mirrors and she puts her hands at the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock position. I
Right.
guarantee you, Wayne, in a year, she'll be driving with one hand, putting on lipstick, eating a Big Mac, listening to the stereo because it'll be
Excellent. Yeah.
automatic. Yeah, it's the same thing with storytelling is we just need practice. And this is why I always tell people, I mean, there's really only two ways to get better at speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. I mean, I watch 10 speakers a day. I watch politicians, I watch comedians, I watch televangelists, I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. I'll give your audience a ninja strategy. I watch a lot of televised award shows because
Mm,
when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their time. Now, most people waste their time. They get up, they're like, I want to thank God, I want to thank the Academy. Stupid. Nobody's paying attention. But every now and then, a person does an incredible job. So, a few years ago, there was a guy by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, Wayne, this is Hollywood. The important people are in the front of the room, the actors. And you can tell none of them are paying. This is film editing. They're not even paying attention. And Joe Walker stands up there. He's British. He speaks very slowly and deliberately. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera scans the crowd. You see people kind of leaning in, like, what's he talking about? He says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, Will, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. Well done, Joe Walker. 45 seconds. He did it. He connected. So the first way you get better at speaking is watching lots of great speakers. The second way you get better at speaking, I've had lots of great coaches and mentors in my life. One of my coaches was a guy by the name of Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups.
Yeah.
Translation, you got to do the work. I mean, I
Mm,
express this to my clients all the time. We got to get you speaking. It
mm,
goes to the point, Wayne, when you say a lot of people are bad storytellers, it's because they're not practicing telling stories. You need to really. It's fascinating to me. I think everybody would benefit from an improvisation class in school, something where they just have to make up stories. I did a tour once of Mark Twain's home in Hartford, Connecticut, and my favorite part of the tour was the docent, our tour guide. He showed us the fireplace, and there was 10 objects on top of the fireplace, and he shared with us that every night, Mark Twain's daughters would put the objects in a different order, and they'd sit by the fireplace while their father told them a story with the objects in that order. Oh, that's why Mark Twain is America's greatest storyteller. He told stories every day. So it's just like anything else. It's practice. It's practice. You need the reps.
that I'm just thinking while you're talking there, that doesn't bode well for the future with our younger youth in many cases being so disconnected from everything other than social media, the phone, they're not communicating out loud.
Yeah,
And
you're absolutely right. It is a lost art. I look at and I fear. I mean, I guess I shouldn't fear it. I'll sound like an old guy about that, but it's the truth. The lost art of the conversation. I mean, when I was in Ireland, it was great. I was sitting next to two Irish guys, and the guy to my left had had that lung cancer surgery, so he's speaking out of his throat, and he does this to me. He's like, you know, laddie, I used to be the Irish ambassador to Libya, and we all talk. Oh, we hold up our Guinnesses. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The guy to my right, he's like 500 pounds. He looks at me. He's like, you know, laddie, I used to be the heavyweight champion of the world. I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. They're like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a big movie producer in Hollywood. They're like, I'm like, yeah, three Irish guys just lying like you couldn't believe. Is just I love it. And I just listen to the stories. You know, I tell the story when my mom went to Ireland. She was with all these other elderly women on this tour, and there was one woman that had a problem with everything. She'd complain about everything, but the tour guide, the bus driver, was the most affable Irishman. He's like, "Oh, my lady, what can I do to help you?" And she's like, "Oh, my bed's hard. Oh, my lady, what can I do to help you?" Well, they get to Blarney Castle, and for an Irish person, kissing the Blarney Stone is like going to Mecca for a Muslim. Well, they get to Blarney Castle, and Blarney Castle is closed that day, and this woman explodes. She's like, I'm gonna sue you. I'm gonna sue the entire company. And the affable Irishman, he's like, oh, my lady, don't worry. Because the legend says if you can't kiss the Blarney Stone, the next best thing is to kiss somebody who's kissed the Blarney Stone. And she's like, and I suppose you have kissed the Blarney Stone. He's like, no, mum, but I've sat on it. That's the Irish. This is what I grew up with.
very nice, very nice. What's a myth that comes to mind about public speaking? Any myth to dispel?
Yeah, I'll tell you the biggest mistake I see most people make is most people brag during their presentations. And I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. She's a wonderful speaker. She talks about vulnerability, and that's what I insist to people is stop sharing your successes. Start sharing your failures because not
Right.
everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you
Mm,
share your own failures, the more your audience is going to see themselves in you. And that's the whole purpose. You have to understand your purpose of a presentation is to
yeah.
connect with your audience. I mean, I work with clients, a lot of them will brag to me, hey, I got a standing ovation. I'm like, that's great. Or they'll say, oh, people think I'm a great speaker. I'm like, that's great. The only way I measure your effectiveness is how many people in your audience decide to take the next step with you. I mean, now that can be an unpaid next step, like subscribe to my podcast or book a free phone call, or it can be a paid offer like buy my product or invest in my coaching. But I'm looking at presentations that don't just move hearts. We also want to move the needle. We need to make you
Yeah.
effective. And
Yeah.
so that's what Coach Jimmy and I are always looking at in your presentation is, okay, we need to switch this and put this here. We'll have more effectiveness. I mean, and that's why I think entrepreneurs need to learn how to communicate better. I mean, you look at a guy, I always point to Steve Jobs because I think his commencement speech at Stanford is one of the most incredible presentations I've seen in my lifetime. Also, when he introduced the iPhone, the way he set up that speech is so well done. There's nothing that gets me more excited than watching people that give an effective presentation, and everybody has that ability. And I've seen it. Even the TEDx talk I just watched this woman deliver, I can hardly wait to help her with her next TEDx talk because it won't be anything like the one I just saw. I'm like, no, 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 no. You just gave so many numbers. You can connect with stories like stop speeding through it. The stories and the description really it's horrible, Wayne. As I grow older, it turns out all of my idols are scumbags. But when I was a kid, I idolized Bill Cosby, just the funniest comedian ever. And that
Yeah.
guy could tell a story for 90 minutes about nothing, and you're hanging on every word because he takes his time, he describes what he sees, what he smells, what he tastes. Just an incredible storyteller. And I love, and I watch people all the time. I mean, I was working with a client the other day, and one of the speeches I was showing her was from a bridesmaid's wedding toast, and she's like, "How did you find this?" I'm like, "Oh, you have no idea. I watch everything. I watch all. I mean, people think that a presentation is just in front of a large group of people. I mean, oh no, no, no. I watch board presentations. I watch people that are pitching their ideas to get funding for, I was just working with a firm in Silicon Valley and watching their pitches. I'm like, okay, Shark Tank, you watch Shark Tanks all around the world, watching people, what is it that captivates people to want to invest in your idea? Those are good things to watch. So this, again, I can't overemphasize this. You should watch people. Another thing, a myth when you're I mean, I'm going long on your question. So another myth, this is why I watch comedians. One of my favorite things that comedians do is they take their perceived weakness and they turn it into their strength. So Kevin Hart is a short black guy. So what does he do? He tells lots of jokes about being a short black guy. Jim
Yeah.
Gaffigan's a big fat white guy. So what's he do? He tells lots of jokes about being a big fat white guy. I'm like, wow, that's really smart. Take what if I had in our last presidential election, I do help politicians. I did not help either President Biden or President Trump. But if I was advising President Biden, I would have said, make fun about your age. I can't remember anything because if he makes fun of his age, it's no longer an issue because he's making fun of it. President Trump, make fun of your humility. Nobody is more humble than me. If you make fun of it, now it becomes something that everybody enjoys about you, which is a very different strategy. So I always like watching comedians because they're the best at doing that.
Mm. I was visualizing again. You've sent me off on memory lane. I have to say, I still to this day have the 33 size LPs with Bill Cosby and Fat Albert, and My brother-in-law and his parents loved Bill Cosby, and Saturday mornings we used to gather around the record player listening to Bill Cosby, Fat Albert.
Yep.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah, sorry to take
Great
this, but
show. It's
fantastic.
absolutely great show.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you mentioned at the very beginning was, public speaking is such a powerful tool for people in business. And one question that I have is the public speaking gives you the visibility, the credibility. But what do you do with that when you step off the stage? How do you turn that into results?
Yeah, so the presentation that I help people, and Jimmy and I help people, is we call it a well-crafted story. Politicians would call it a stump speech. Superhero movies, they call it an origin story. You can call it peanut butter and jelly, doesn't matter what you call it. But
Yeah,
this is a talk that you're going to deliver again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences. And we want to make sure it's flexible enough that you can deliver it as a 45-minute keynote or as a 30-second elevator pitch.
right.
But it's the same reason I do podcasts. It actually kind of drives Jimmy crazy that I do so many podcasts. And I say podcasts are win, 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 win. I love podcasts because I get to practice. I mean, you're asking me questions today that people haven't asked me before. I'm like, oh, now I know how to answer this question, or oh, maybe I could have done a better job on that question. And then secondly, you never know who's listening. He gets annoyed. He's like, "You're going on a podcast. They only have one subscriber." I'm like, yeah, but if the subscriber is Oprah Winfrey, that's a pretty good subscriber. You never know who's. I'm completely serious about that. When I first started speaking, Wayne, I had two speaking bureaus that were paying me $700 a day. Meanwhile, my public library, they asked me if I would do a free talk at the library. They're like, "We'll have 500 people." I'm like, okay, I'll do that. Four people showed up. Two of them were my realtors. The other two was a Hispanic couple that didn't speak a word of English. And so I believe in giving 110%. So I translated as much into Spanish as I could. We all had a fun time. A week later, it turns out the Hispanic woman was taking English classes at the Adult Literacy Center. She recommended me to give a 45-minute talk for $4,000, which was six times my daily fee at the time. I realized, whoa, you have no idea. To get back to your question about how do you adapt this, I mean, I use it with my own kids. I use the strategies, the structure with my, I mean, there's things that Jimmy and I are teaching people about, pacing your audience. One of the techniques is called picture a day, where you get the kids thinking of it. I'll do this with my own kid. Picture a day when your room is cleaner than every other room in the house. Picture a day when mom and I are saying to you, "Oh, we're so proud to have a child like you." Picture a day when your parents are never on your back. That day is just a clean bedroom away. But I'm practicing. I practice on my own kids all the time. But there's little strategies there. One of the things, so former teacher, so all of my processes either rhyme or they're alliterative. So Jimmy and I, we teach people what we call the 5 C's process. So before you put together your speech, first of all, you need clarity. And then once we put together your speech, you need to be able to connect with your audience, teach meaningful content that serves them, have one clear call to action, and finally have an emotional close that gets people rushing to want to continue to work with you.
Right.
And a woman I was working with a couple of weeks ago. She's a nutritionist, and so her whole presentation is she had digestive issues, and so she teaches people with digestive issues how to live a healthier lifestyle in 90 days. And she didn't know how to close her presentation. And so one of the techniques Jimmy and I teach is to have a different story that has nothing to do with anything you've taught, but is a metaphor for what you want the audience to do. So I asked her, well, what do you want the audience to do? And she said, well, I want them to understand that they can't do this on their own. I said, oh, you need to hire an expert story. She's like, what's that? I'm like, okay, I'll give a demonstration. So this is how I would end her presentation. I'll leave you with this. Many years ago, my wife and I had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, set to go. And as we were driving to the theater, we got a flat tire. My wife said, well, I'll call the tow truck company, AAA. I said, you don't have to call them. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I opened up the trunk and I got out the spare tire, and then I got the pumper thing, and I got the big jack thing to take out the nuts thing on the tire. 27 minutes later, I have grease all over me. I have not fixed the flat tire. My wife is shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, she had called the towing company when I had started. And this tow truck shows up, and this 17-year-old punk kid hops out and he fixes my flat tire in 3 minutes flat. You know, I think there's times in life when all of us think we can do it ourselves, but if you want to save time, you want to save money, and you want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so what I've shown her is here's a story that has nothing to do with nutrition, but what it's telling the audience is it's alluding, I mean, mine's pretty smart, it's sophisticated. Oh, I could do it, but if I want to avoid all these other problems, I should probably hire her. And so that's the impact of storytelling. And again, I go biblical. I mean, that's what Jesus, whenever he was trying to make a point, he would tell a story because he's like, "You dense people, you don't understand it otherwise. So here's a story." And I'm like, it's fantastic. I mean, that's why I think people are silly to overlook children's stories. You have no idea those little children's stories you heard as a child, how much they stick to you. Hansel and Gretel. Oh, don't talk to strangers. I mean, I'm thinking about all of the little nursery rhymes and things that I learned. I'm like, wow, it's kind of fascinating. There's a lot of wisdom in those things.
You are filled with insight for sure and humor. Um, One last piece of advice: people who are terrified about public speaking, any sort of immediate tip they can put into practice?
Yeah, so as a specific strategy, first of all, you're in good company. I mean, Barbara Streisand vomits before she ever goes on stage. Bill Russell, the famous basketball player, used to vomit before every game. President Reagan vomited before every speech he ever gave. So you're in good company. There's a lot of people that get nervous or fearful. A couple of things that I usually stress with people is look for the one person in your audience that's smiling and just focus on that person. Really, though, the best way to get over your stage fright is with practice. It's kind of like when I was in college, I hadn't really studied for my final exam, and as I walked in the classroom, I told the professor, "I'm like, I hope I do well." And he looked at me, shook his head. He's like, "You know, the time to make the bet is before the wheel starts to spin, Danny." He's right. I would have felt a lot more confident had I studied for it. The same thing with speaking. But again, it is a skill. I've worked with some people with severe stage fright who had no willingness to go on stage, and I'm not going to say that they love going on stages, but they're much more comfortable going on stages now, and they understand the effectiveness of it as a client acquisition tool, and that's what we're trying to do is how to grow your business. I mean,
Hmm.
and it was either William Shakespeare or Keanu Reeves who once said, "All the world's a stage," and this podcast is a stage. Talking on the phone with your grandma is a stage. I mean, you alluded to it earlier, Wayne. A lot of people stink at storytelling because they're not practicing. You got to
Yeah.
practice telling stories, and and you're also right. It's something that people don't debate because it's in our DNA. I mean, even the cavemen, regaling each other at the fire. I mean, the people that died were the people that didn't listen to the storytelling about when Igu was telling me the story about why you shouldn't go to the poisonous bush and eat the purple berries. I mean, if you didn't listen to that story, you're in bad shape. That's the importance of storytelling.
Yeah. Anything out there in the world at the moment got you excited?
I'm sorry?
Anything in the world at the moment got you excited?
Everything gets me excited. Not the news. I would I tell people turn off the news and read a funny children's book. I'm excited about traveling. I think the next place I want to go to is Kazakhstan because a lot of people can't say they've been to Kazakhstan. I'm like, that sounds cool. Everybody says they've gone to the Bahamas. I'm going to say I've been to Kazakhstan or something like that. That'd be kind of cool. Uh, my kids are
People
doing
probably can't
well.
pronounce it.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm trying to get rid of the stereotype that Americans don't know anything about geography. I think the way you learn geography is you travel the world, and I love going to play. I haven't, and I share with you, I haven't been to Australia yet, but Australia's first world, so Australia's going to be easy. I have no, maybe I'll go to Australia like in January for the Australian Open or something. That might be fun. Or you and I can go to a rugby match. I'd love to go to a rugby and Australian rules football. I like that, but that's what I love about travel is. Going all around the planet. People are people. Going, Ireland was great. I just listening to the stories that people were telling me. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. Yeah, so that excites me. I love I do love, I mean, I'm reading all the time. I'll read a horrible book, but if there's one decent story in there, it was worth my time. I just read a book on marketing. It was a boring book, but there was one story that was fantastic. It was about this guy's going all around the world looking for the next big marketing thing. And he's in Chile watching these fishermen and he's noticing they're catching the fish they're supposed to catch, and there's these other fish that they put in another barrel. He's like, "Oh, you put those in another barrel um, because you're paid to catch this fish." And they're like, "That's right." And he notices they're eating the other fish. He's like, "Oh, you're eating that fish because you're paid to catch this other fish." Like they're like, "Well, yeah, but this fish actually tastes better than the other fish that we get paid for." He's like, "May I taste it?" They're like, "Sure." He tastes it. He's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much better. What's it called?" They're like, "Oh, it's called the bonefish." The bonefish? That's the worst name I've ever heard him. He thinks about it. And so he brings it to the United States. It's now the number one fish sold at fancy fine dining restaurants in America. The bonefish he renamed the Chilean sea bass. I'm like, I never knew that story. I thought that was fantastic. So you give me stories like that'll keep me going.
Danny, we could spend a long time. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we could share stories for a long time. I'm sure. Where can people connect with you? What's the best place?
Well, again, I've already given you a whole bunch of websites, so I'll give you one more. As a thank you to you, Wayne, and your audience for having to listen to me. If you go to freestoryguide.com, guide like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'll give everybody their own well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the actual process that Coach Jimmy and I take our clients through on how to create your well-crafted story. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of where do I put this and why do I put this here? And what this means for you is the peace of mind that I have a client acquisition tool that I can repeat again and again by drawing new audiences to my business. So you can get that at freestoryguide.com. And Wayne, I just want to thank you. I think the audience can figure out. I think you and I could talk forever, and I definitely have to make the trip down under just so we can hang out.
For sure. I've got the Irish pub in mind already, and we'll share a Guinness, and we'll definitely go to one of the matches.
That's right.
So I look forward to it. Danny, thanks so much for being on the ET project. Really been a delight. Look forward to staying in contact.
Absolutely.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.